I always believed my life would remain quietly tucked between the rhythm of healing herbs and the soft rustle of pine needles that lined the outskirts of our valley, a life shaped by gentle routines rather than destiny's heavy hand. And on most days that simplicity was enough for me, waking before dawn to grind moonleaf roots, greeting the elders as they shuffled past my small hut, listening to pups chase each other across the clearing while their laughter echoed against the mountains. But beneath that peaceful surface, whispers of something ancient had begun to stir, faint at first, no louder than the shift of wind across the treetops or the hush that occasionally fell over the forest at the wrong time of day. Moments when even the birds held their breath as though listening for something I couldn't yet hear. I tried to ignore those strange silences, tried to tell myself they were tricks of my imagination, the side effects of too many late nights in the healer's tent, yet deep down a quiet unease pooled in my chest, as if some unseen thread tugged gently at my spirit, warning me of a change I wasn't ready to name. Still, the sun rose each morning, the pack bustled with its usual warmth, and I carried out my duties with steady hands, answering the same familiar calls, sprained ankles, mild fevers, pups who played too rough, and all the while pretending not to notice how the air would sometimes thicken around me, as if the forest itself were holding its breath whenever I walked by. It became harder to ignore once the howls started, distant and low, echoing from the northern ridge long after every patrol had returned to the camp, howls layered with a resonance that didn't belong to any wolf I knew, wild yet deliberate, like a voice calling across worlds, searching for someone who had not yet learned how to listen. The elders exchanged uneasy glances whenever those sounds drifted through the trees, but no one spoke of them directly, as though giving them names might summon something we weren't prepared to face, and I followed their lead, burying the prickle of curiosity that tried to rise each time the sound touched my spine. But then came the nights when I felt watched, not in a fearful way, but in a way that made my senses sharpen, my heartbeat slow, as though instinct recognized a presence my mind could not. And on those nights I would step outside my hut and gaze into the treeline, eyes adjusting slowly to the darkness until shapes began to form, until shadows deepened in ways that defied the moonlight, and sometimes, just for a heartbeat, I thought I saw movement among the pines, a massive silhouette where no wolf should be standing, taller than any member of our pack, built of sheer darkness with edges that bled into the forest, as if it wasn't fully part of this world. Other times it was not a shape but a single point of light, a faint red glow, unblinking, watching me from between the branches, steady and patient, vanishing the instant I dared take a step toward it. I told myself it was my imagination, the forest playing tricks, but the longer I tried to dismiss it, the more certain I became that something was truly there, something ancient, something powerful, something waiting. Even during the day the world felt subtly shifted, humming beneath its skin, gusts of wind that carried no scent, paw prints that appeared near the river only to disappear mid-stride, leaves trembling on still branches as though brushed by invisible movement, and each strange sign left a quiet flutter in my chest, a wordless intuition that my life of soft routines and safe predictability was holding its final breaths. I tried to cling to the comfort of normalcy, lingering longer in the healer's tent, laughing more loudly with the pups, helping the elders with tasks they didn't truly need help with, all in desperate hopes of anchoring myself to the life I knew. But the world had already started tilting beneath my feet, the universe bending towards some unseen horizon, and no matter how tightly I gripped the remnants of the familiar, something in the air whispered that change was inevitable. On the last evening before everything shifted, the forest was strangely quiet, the kind of quiet that settles not from peace but from anticipation, as if every living thing sensed a threshold waiting to be crossed. And when I stepped outside to breathe in the dusk, I saw it again, the outline of a massive wolf at the forest's edge, still as carved stone, with a single red eye gleaming faintly through the mist, watching me with a patience that felt older than the mountains themselves. And though the shape dissolved a moment later, leaving the treeline empty, I felt the truth settle into my bones like the first drop of rain before a storm. My ordinary life was ending, even if I didn't yet know what waited in the shadows ready to take its place. And the days that followed, it became impossible to pretend that the world around me hadn't begun to shift in ways both delicate and deeply unsettling, as though reality itself had developed small cracks through which something ancient and unseen whispered, brushing the edges of my senses with cold fingertips. It started subtly, with tiny emotional tremors, moments when my chest tightened for no reason, When familiar faces in the pack seemed distant, their smiles fading too quickly, their conversations carrying strange hesitations, as if everyone felt something approaching but refused to name it, yet those small moments soon grew into a pattern impossible to ignore, a quiet heaviness settling over the camp like fog that never fully lifted, even beneath the bright afternoon sun. I sensed the tension in the way wolves paused mid-sentence and glanced toward the treeline, in the way pups stayed closer to their mothers, as though instinct warned them against wandering too far. Even the elders seemed restless, sitting together more often, murmuring in low voices, their eyes tracking every unusual shadow that passed across the ground, and though they tried to hide their concern from the younger wolves, I caught it in the tightness of their shoulders, in the way they lingered near the fire on nights when they would normally retire early. I tried to keep my mind on my work, but sleep became elusive, slipping through my fingers no matter how exhausted I felt, and when it finally came it brought dreams wrapped in layers of meaning I didn't understand, dreams of standing alone in an endless field under a blood-red moon, of hearing someone call my name from behind me though no figure appeared, of feeling the earth tremble with the sound of footsteps too large to belong to any wolf I had ever known. In one dream, I stood at the edge of a vast cliff overlooking a sea of shadows, and just before I woke I felt a warm breath at my side, not human, not entirely wolf, something otherworldly, its voice whispering a single word I couldn't remember by the time consciousness returned, leaving only the echo of its weight on my heart. Each morning I awoke with my pulse racing and the taste of cold wind on my tongue, as though I had truly been standing at the edge of something ancient, some threshold between what I knew and what waited for me, and as the dreams intensified, so too did the strange coincidences around me, stones arranged in deliberate circles near my door, feathers that appeared on my windowsill despite there being no birds in sight, and the unmistakable sense that I was being steered in certain directions throughout the day. Nudged by forces I couldn't see, sometimes, while walking through camp, I would pause mid-step without knowing why, only to see a falling branch crash down exactly where I would have been standing had I not stopped. Other times I found myself taking detours I never intended, drawn inexplicably toward the river, the ridge, or the old ruined altar deep in the forest, always accompanied by a faint prickle at the back of my neck, as though someone, or something, guided me there with careful purpose. And through it all, Cale's presence grew stronger, no longer content to lurk as a suggestion in the corner of my vision. I saw him more clearly now, though never completely, his dark, massive form slipping between trees like liquid shadow, his glowing red eye appearing for one heartbeat, two heartbeats, then disappearing as though swallowed by the forest itself, leaving behind only the sharp, electric hum of his presence in the air. One morning, I stepped outside and found deep claw marks etched into the earth in front of my hut, deliberate and unervingly perfect, forming a symbol I didn't recognize but felt in my bones, a warning or perhaps a protection, its meaning vibrating inside me like a distant drum. Another time, while gathering herbs near the river, a sudden gust of wind pressed against my back, and when I turned I caught a glimpse of Cale standing silently on the opposite bank, the water unnaturally still around him, his body motionless except for the slow flicker of his red eye, reflecting both the light of day and something far older. He didn't move toward me, didn't growl or signal danger, but the weight of his stare pressed against me until my heartbeat synced with the rhythm of the river, and for a moment I felt as though he were trying to speak to me without sound, urging me to understand something just beyond my reach. Each encounter left my thoughts buzzing, my instincts sharpened, as though my spirit had begun tuning itself to a frequency I had previously ignored. Even the wolves of the pack sensed him now, their ears perking up whenever he drew near, though none were brave enough to mention him out loud, as if speaking his name would invite truths they weren't prepared to face. I felt increasingly torn between fear and a strange, inexplicable trust, because despite his ominous presence, Cale never threatened me. Instead, it felt as if he was watching over me, guiding me from the shadows, leaving signs when danger crept too close, shifting the world in subtle ways that protected me even when I didn't realize I needed protecting. And yet, the more he appeared, the more the dreams deepened, filling with symbols that tangled themselves into my waking thoughts, silver threads stretching between stars, wolves bowing beneath a lunar eclipse, a throne carved from stone and bone illuminated by flickering moonfire, and always, always, that same whisper I couldn't decipher, brushing my skin like a cold breeze, fading the moment I tried to catch it. I began writing the dreams down, hoping the patterns would reveal themselves, but all it did was make me more aware of the invisible hand shaping my days, nudging me toward moments that felt both random and orchestrated, as though I walked along a path someone else had drawn long before I was born. And slowly, impossibly, a realization began to build inside me, heavy and undeniable, settling into my chest with each passing night. I was not simply witnessing these changes, I was the center of them, the axis around which the shadows shifted, the reason Cale watched so closely and the force behind the strange signs that seemed to bloom in my wake. Every dream, every silence, every flickering red eye in the dark was leading me somewhere, pulling me toward a destiny I had never asked for. And though I didn't yet understand its shape or purpose, a chilling clarity whispered through me with the certainty of moonlight. I was being guided, not by chance or fear, but by something ancient and deliberate that had already begun weaving my fate into its own. I first sensed him before I ever saw him, a shifting pressure in the air that felt like gravity itself had tilted, pulling at something deep inside my chest, drawing my awareness toward the center of the forest as though an invisible thread had tightened between us. And even though I had no name for the feeling, every instinct in me rose in sharp, startled recognition, as if some part of me I didn't know existed had suddenly awakened. The forest reacted before the pack did, branches shivering without wind, leaves trembling in patterns that resembled whispers rather than movement, the animals falling silent in a way that felt reverent rather than fearful. And it wasn't until the sky dimmed unexpectedly, clouds swallowing the sunlight in a smooth, unnatural wave, that I realized I was no longer alone on the path leading away from camp. The air thickened with an energy more ancient than the stones beneath my feet, and the scent that reached me, a blend of storm-soaked earth, moonlit frost, and a strange, clean sharpness, was unlike any scent I had ever known, wolf or otherwise, tugging at my lungs with an inexplicable familiarity that made my heart stumble. When he finally emerged through the shadows between the pines, his presence filled the clearing so completely it felt as though the world narrowed to a single point. His silhouette tall and imposing, wrapped in an aura that shimmered like heat over snow, shifting between light and shadow in gentle, impossible waves, and though he carried no visible symbol of rank, no crown or crest, every part of me knew without question that this was no ordinary wolf, no wandering rogue, no simple alpha. This was a being whose existence bent the world around him. A figure whose eyes held the weight of countless moons and the kind of power that lived in the story's elders whispered only when the fire burned low. He stepped forward, silent and steady, and when his gaze locked onto mine, the breath caught in my throat as though my spirit recognized him long before my mind did. The bond that stirred between us was not warm or comforting, not the soft touch of fate or the gentle pull of affection, but something far deeper, more potent, a sharp crack of energy that felt like a key turning inside an ancient lock within my bones. I should have stepped back, I should have bowed, I should have done anything other than stand frozen in place, yet I couldn't move, caught in the gravity of him, sensing that whatever he was, whatever he wanted, my life orbited him now whether I accepted it or not. He studied me carefully, his expression unreadable, the faintest glint of curiosity flickering in his eyes, and the moment stretched so long and taut that even the forest seemed to lean closer, waiting. But before he could speak, a ripple of motion swept across the clearing, cold and deliberate, and Cale emerged from the shadows behind me, not walking, not approaching, but simply existing where a heartbeat ago he hadn't been, the massive dark wolf as silent as ever, his fur swallowing the light, his left eye glowing with a steady, dim ember that pulsed like a heartbeat. The newcomer's gaze flicked toward Cale, and something silent passed between them, a recognition deeper than rivalry, older than the pack, the kind of acknowledgement that spoke of shared history carved into time itself. I felt tension coil through the clearing, the air crackling with unspoken truths, and then Cale stepped closer, not toward the newcomer, but toward me, his massive form brushing the edge of my awareness with an almost protective weight, his voice erupting not in sound but in raw meaning, slipping into my mind as clearly as if he had spoken aloud. Your world stands on a lie. The words hit me with the force of a blow, not painful but disorienting, as though the ground beneath me had dissolved for a moment, leaving me suspended above a truth I had never thought to question. The newcomer's expression didn't shift, but the energy around him tightened, like a tide drawing back before a storm, and his gaze softened, not with pity, but with understanding. as though he knew exactly what Kale's message meant and had been waiting for the moment it would reach me. What lie? I whispered, my voice trembling despite my attempt to steady it, but Kale only stared, his red eye burning brighter for a single heartbeat before dimming again, and in his silence I felt the weight of secrets layered beneath secrets, truths buried so deeply that even asking the question felt like trespassing. The newcomer stepped closer, close enough that the air hummed gently against my skin, his presence both grounding and overwhelming, and though he still hadn't spoken a single word, I felt something radiate from him, recognition, inevitability, a pull that was neither gentle nor harsh but simply true, as if he carried a piece of my fate in his hands. His gaze held mine with an intensity that rooted me in place, and in that moment I sensed that everything I thought I knew, my pack, my history, my purpose, was merely the surface layer of something much more intricate, a tapestry woven long before my birth, one in which I played a role I had never imagined. I thought of my quiet life, the routines I'd clung to, the peaceful certainty of who I believed myself to be, and suddenly all of it felt fragile, thin as paper, threatened by a truth I could feel rising around me like a tide. The world seemed to tilt again, the sounds of the forest dimming until all I could hear was the thrum of my own heartbeat and the faint rustle of Kale shifting behind me. His presence both warning and reassurance condensed into a single silent moment, and as the newcomer finally inhaled, preparing to speak the words that would shatter the last remnants of my calm, I felt the foundation of my identity tremble, a single core belief cracking beneath the weight of destiny, the belief that I understood who I was, and the certainty that my life had ever been my own. The days that followed unfolded in a haze where reality thinned and memory bled into vision, where each breath felt like a step between worlds I had never been meant to see, and though I tried desperately to hold on to the familiar rhythm of my life, everything I touched seemed to ripple with hidden meaning, as if truth lurked beneath the surface of every sound, every shadow, every heartbeat. Sleep no longer offered rest but instead became a doorway into realms stitched together by moonlight and ancient echoes, and each night I found myself standing within the same shifting dream, a forest suspended in twilight, the sky pulsing with a strange red glow, the air alive with whispers that curled around me like smoke, whispering fragments of words and voices both familiar and impossibly old, calling me by names I had never heard yet somehow recognized. Sometimes the trees bent toward me as though listening, their branches inscribed with runes that flickered faintly in silver and crimson, symbols that rearranged themselves the moment I tried to understand them, forming shapes that felt like warnings, or memories, or perhaps instructions. Other nights I wandered through a stone hallway lined with mirrors that reflected not my body but the spirits of wolves I had never met, an unbroken lineage of eyes filled with sorrow, wisdom, and unspoken burdens. Wolves who bowed their heads when they saw me, not out of respect but out of resignation, as if they had been waiting for me to finally see them. And there, at the end of the hallway, always stood Kale, his dark form towering above the flickering reflections, his glowing red eye the only constant in a world that shifted like wind-blown sand, watching me with a gravity that pulled at my soul even after I awoke, drenched in sweat and wrapped in the faint scent of pine and storm that clung to my skin long after dawn. The visions didn't stop when I opened my eyes. Sometimes I caught glimpses of them overlaying the waking world, transparent and unreal yet impossible to ignore, a wolf's silhouette flickering behind a passing villager, a ghostly echo of an unknown voice murmuring warnings beneath the sound of wind, the distant crash of waves against a shore that didn't exist anywhere near the valley. And though I tried to hide these episodes from the pack, they watched me with strained curiosity, their expressions shifting with each passing day as if they knew more than they admitted. The elders, once warm and welcoming, now regarded me with a kind of sorrowful caution, their conversations halting abruptly whenever I approached, their gazes lingering too long on the mark on my wrist I didn't remember receiving, the faint crescent-shaped imprint that glowed softly whenever moonlight touched it, as if responding to a force that lived deep within my bones. I began digging through the archives hidden beneath the meeting hall, searching for answers in scrolls so old their ink had nearly faded. And though much of the writing was too worn to decipher, I found pieces, fragments of a prophecy whispered by the moon spirit herself, a tale of a wolf born every few generations whose soul would carry the memory of the first bond, the first howl, the first betrayal, a wolf who would awaken during a cycle of red moons, when shadows grew long and the veil between realms thinned. And though the texts never named her directly, they spoke of a healer's touch, a strange sixth sense, dreams woven with fire and frost, and a companion in darkness, a rogue bound not by pack or blood but by fate, a watcher who would guard her until the moment of truth. My hands trembled as I read those words, my pulse thrumming with a mixture of denial and fear, because every line mirrored the life I had tried to convince myself was ordinary, every symbol echoing the dreams I refused to interpret. And when I whispered the name of the rogue mentioned in the prophecy, the candles flickered violently, throwing shadows across the stone walls in the exact shape of Cale's towering silhouette. Memories I didn't know I possessed surged through me, visions of a time long before my birth, a battle fought under a blood-red moon, wolves falling one by one as a great darkness crawled through the land, a young Luna standing alone at the center of the chaos with a glowing mark on her wrist identical to mine, her voice woven with sorrow as she whispered a vow into the dying wind, "Let this cycle not break, let my soul return when the world needs its keeper." My heart pounded against my ribs, the realization slamming into me with the force of a storm as I understood that my dreams were not dreams at all but memories, ancestral echoes carried through my blood, fragments of a life that had once shaped the fate of the pack. The ground beneath me seemed to sway as I stumbled up the steps, desperate for air, and the moment I reached the surface, the forest went still in a way that felt intentional, as if holding itself together for my sake. Cale stood at the edge of the clearing, his dark form half hidden in shadow, his red eye glowing softly, almost sorrowfully, as if he already knew everything I had just discovered, as if he had been waiting for this moment and dreading it all at once. When I met his gaze, memories flickered behind my eyes again, glimpses of him standing beside the past Luna, guiding her through the same unraveling truth, his loyalty carved into time itself, his silence not cold but reverent, tied to a vow as old as the prophecy. I felt the wind shift, cold and sharp, brushing my cheek like a whispered apology, and the weight of realization pressed into my chest until breathing became difficult, because everything I knew, the pack's history, my role within it, the quiet life I had believed was mine, was built on an illusion meant to protect me from the truth. I wasn't a healer by fate or by chance, wasn't an ordinary wolf caught in a strange moment of destiny, but the reborn echo of the Luna who had once stood against the darkness, the key the prophecy spoke of, and suddenly the life I had clung to so tightly felt like a veil lifting from my eyes. Cale stepped closer, his massive shadow stretching across the clearing like an eclipse, his presence grounding me even as it shattered every belief I had held dear, and in that fragile, breathtaking moment, with the weight of past and future colliding in my chest, I understood with painful clarity that my purpose had never been to heal the pack's wounds but to confront the rising darkness only I could see, because destiny hadn't chosen me now, it had chosen me long before I ever drew my first breath, woke before dawn, long before the first silver threads of morning loosened the darkness, with my heart trapped between two uneven beats, as if my body already knew what my mind refused to face, and as I sat upright in the quiet of my chamber, the weight of sleepless nights pressed against my ribs like a truth begging to be acknowledged, leaving me questioning whether the fear stirring inside me belonged to the pack's shifting destiny or to the storm I sensed rising within myself. For days now, the atmosphere around us had turned heavy, charged with something unspoken, as though the air carried the tremor of an invisible current, and while no open conflict had erupted and no enemy had been spotted at our borders, the wolves moved with measured caution, exchanging silent, uneasy glances that revealed far more than their words ever could, and this tension settled into my skin, threading through every instinct I possessed until even the sound of leaves brushing together felt like an omen. I tried to steady myself by recalling the faces of those who trusted me, elders with weary eyes, young wolves seeking reassurance, warriors waiting for direction, yet every time I reached for certainty, the memory of the prophecy surfaced like a rising tide, whispering warnings I wasn't prepared to accept, telling me that everything we believed about our origins, our strength, our unity, was part of a truth we had never fully understood, and in moments of stillness, when the world paused, I felt Cale's presence more distinctly than ever, not as a distant watcher hidden beneath branches or a flicker of red light between shadows, but as something closer, almost brushing the edges of my awareness, as though he stood just behind me, silent, unbreathing, seeing into the parts of my heart I kept hidden from everyone else. Each time I felt him, I tried to turn, to catch even a glimpse, yet the space behind me would always remain empty, and still some instinct within me whispered that he lingered there, not to frighten me, but to steady me, to warn me, to ensure I would not walk blindly into the choices that now closed in from every side. The alpha moved differently as well, guarded, watchful, keeping secrets behind eyes once clear as open sky, and I knew he felt the shift too, perhaps even anticipated the consequences of truths we had barely begun to uncover, and though I longed to confront him, to demand clarity, a part of me faltered, held back by the changes in our bond, which felt strained like a thread pulled too tightly, on the verge of snapping under pressure neither of us knew how to ease. And as these uncertainties grew heavier, my dreams, once filled with simple fragments of memory or whispering images, became sweeping visions washed in silver moonlight and deep forest shadow, where wolves with ancient eyes circled me, murmuring of choices, sacrifices, and fragile destinies resting on a single decision I had not yet made, and in these dreams Kale always appeared last, stepping from nothingness with his silent, imposing form, the glow of his red eye illuminating truths I could not interpret, as if he expected me to understand a language beyond sound. Each morning I woke from these visions with my chest tight, my throat heavy, and a single question echoing beneath everything. Who must I become to protect those I love, and what must I surrender to do so? Day by day, the weight of that question grew sharper until even small interactions, gentle conversations, shared patrols, warm exchanges, felt fragile, like they existed under the shadow of an ending none of us could yet name. The warriors came to me quietly, asking if the strange hush around the forest meant danger, and though I tried to soothe them, my voice trembled with truths I had no right to speak. The pups sensed something too, their playful joy dimming, their wide eyes drifting toward the treeline with unspoken unease, and every time I saw their worry, something inside me fractured further. I sought counsel with the elders, hoping for clarity, but their words twisted like vines around old fears, offering wisdom wrapped in mystery, reinforcing the idea that nothing remained the same, not the pack, not the land, not even me. Eventually the pressure swelled until I found myself standing alone at the lake, the moon mirrored like a perfect silver coin upon its surface, and the reflection of my own face startled me, for I looked older, sharper, marked by choices I had not yet made, and as I stared at my wavering image, Kale's silhouette emerged in the trees behind me, silent as always yet unmistakable, the dark lines of his wolf form strong and still, his single crimson eye glowing faintly like a heartbeat in the gloom. I didn't turn, though I felt him watching with the intensity of a guardian deciding whether to intervene, and the truth settled into me like cold water. Something was coming, something I could no longer delay, avoid, or hope would resolve without cost, and when his presence disappeared as quietly as it had arrived, I understood that he had not come to reassure me but to confirm what I already felt deep in my bones. Returning to the packhouse felt heavier than any journey I had ever taken, and when I stepped through the doorway, the alpha waited for me with a guarded expression I had never seen before, a mixture of worry, resignation, and something I couldn't name, and though we exchanged no words, the silence between us spoke with piercing clarity. Whatever storm approached, we would not face it unbroken. Over the next hours, a painful choice began to crystallize, one that demanded I separate myself from someone I treasured, not out of anger, not out of abandonment, but out of protection, because staying close meant endangering them in ways neither love nor loyalty could repair, and no matter how softly or carefully I tried to explain this truth, the hurt in their eyes carved into me like the echo of a howl I could not answer. It was in that moment, as the person I loved most stepped back from me with disbelief trembling in their breath, that I felt Kale again, not behind me this time but somewhere within the silence, as though his presence had woven into the edges of my grief to anchor me against collapse, and I realized that destiny was not a path walked with certainty but one shaped through sacrifice. When the door finally closed between us, its quiet thud settling like a final heartbeat, the storm inside me broke open, not with violence but with a heavy, aching resolve, and I stood alone in the half-shadowed corridor, knowing that the separation I had just created, one that tore through every instinct, every bond, every promise, was the first irreversible step into a future none of us could escape, a future where I would no longer be simply the Luna of the pack, but something more, something untested, something painfully remade by the cost of this moment. The night after the separation felt impossibly long, stretching across hours that refused to pass, and as I stood alone on the overlook above the forest, the weight of every choice, every vision, every whisper that had guided me to this moment wrapped around my lungs until breathing felt like claiming a destiny I still wasn't certain I deserved. Yet beneath the ache in my chest, something steadier pulsed, an awareness rising from the deepest part of me, like the echo of an instinct older than my first breath, urging me to step forward rather than retreat. The forest below looked different, its shadows deeper, its silence more purposeful, as if the land itself waited for my next move, and for the first time since the visions began, I felt the presence of the pack, not just as individuals relying on me, but as a living, ancient force intertwined with my own pulse, a truth I had somehow overlooked while trying to protect everyone else, and that realization anchored me, grounding my fear into something stronger, something like resolve. As I descended the path toward the gathering grounds, fragments of the prophecy replayed in my mind: the moon's chosen heart, the fractured lineage, the wolf who walks between truths, and though their meaning remained blurry, they no longer felt mysterious in the way they once had. Instead, they felt familiar, like pieces of a memory I had carried all along, simply waiting for me to stop resisting long enough to understand. And with each step I took, I felt something shift within me, a soft awakening I couldn't see but could almost touch, as if an unseen thread connected my heartbeat to the forest, to the pack, to the secrets we were finally ready to confront. When I reached the clearing, the warriors, scouts, and elders had gathered in muted anticipation, their faces turned toward me with a mixture of worry and hope, and though no one spoke, I felt their questions brush against me like small currents of air. What happens now? What did you see? Are we still safe? And instead of shrinking beneath the weight of their expectations, I felt my spine straighten, my breath deepen, as though I had stepped into the place I was always meant to stand. I told them what little I understood, that a shift was coming, that the truth we had lived under was incomplete, that our origins held more than the stories passed down in dens and councils, and though some wolves tensed, others released long-held fears in quiet exhalations, as if hearing the truth aloud finally loosened something within them. But before I could speak further, the wind changed, sweeping through the clearing with an urgency that snapped every instinct to attention, carrying with it a faint, familiar sensation, the subtle, electric sharpness of Kale's presence. And I turned toward the treeline just as a ripple passed between shadow and moonlight, revealing his massive form emerging with silent, predatory grace, as if he had stepped out of an older world and into ours for the final time. His dark coat drank in the night, and the glow of his red eye flickered like an ember caught between dying flame and rising dawn, and though he remained motionless, the entire pack instinctively shifted back, sensing the depth of his power. But I stepped forward without hesitation, drawn by something deeper than fear or curiosity, something like understanding, and when I stood before him, the world fell into a quiet so complete it felt sacred. Kale held my gaze with that single burning eye, and though no words passed between us, something unspoken stretched from him to me: recognition, acceptance, warning, farewell, before he finally broke the silence with a voice that felt more like a vibration through the air than sound itself. The truth awakens in you. Do not lose it. The simplicity of the statement struck with the force of destiny, settling over me like the final piece of a puzzle I had been assembling in the dark, and before I could respond, he lifted his head toward the sky, releasing a low, resonant rumble that felt less like a growl and more like a signal, one that rippled through the clearing, through the soil, through the hearts of every wolf present, stirring something ancient in us all. Then, without warning, he turned away, but not into the forest. First, he approached the old boundary stone at the clearing's edge, the relic etched with forgotten symbols of our pack's origin, symbols worn so thin by time that no wolf alive remembered their meaning, and with a deliberate, powerful sweep of his claw, Kale carved a new mark across its surface, a slash of meaning none of us could decipher but all of us felt, a mark that seemed to thrum with energy, sealing something, revealing something, or perhaps setting something in motion. The moment his claw left the stone, a faint glow pulsed across the ancient carvings, awakening patterns long dormant before fading just as quickly, leaving only the new mark shining faintly as though lit from within, and the realization that Kale had just altered our history. Our understanding of ourselves settled cold and bright inside me. He looked back once, his eyes softer now, more ember than flame, and I felt, rather than heard, a farewell, not sorrowful, not regretful, but inevitable, before he turned fully toward the trees. the shadows swallowed his form in a single fluid motion, though the glow of his red. I lingered between the branches for several heartbeats longer, flickering like a distant star refusing to fade, and when it finally blinked out, the forest seemed to release a long, quiet breath, as though acknowledging the end of something vast, something legendary. The pack stood frozen, unsure whether to mourn or bow or simply absorb what had just transpired, but I stepped toward the boundary stone, placing my hand gently upon the new mark, and the moment my skin touched its surface, a warmth spread through my chest, threading into my pulse in a way that felt like confirmation. The path ahead was mine to claim, and though Kale had guided me to its beginning, the next steps would be mine alone. Even so, his presence lingered like a memory woven into the wind, a reminder that though he had vanished into legend once more, the mark he left, on the stone, on the forest, on me, would shape everything that followed. Dawn began to rise then, soft and hesitant at first, painting the horizon with pale strokes of gold and rose, and as the first full ray broke over the treetops, a single, distant howl echoed through the forest, low and haunting, unmistakably Kale's despite the miles now between us, a final acknowledgement, a final warning, a final blessing, and as the sound faded into silence, a thin red shimmer flickered along the far ridge, one last glint of his eye reflected in the dawn, before dissolving into the growing light, leaving behind only the sunrise, the forest's hush, and the certainty that though he had stepped beyond our world, his legend would walk beside us forever, guiding whatever stories awaited us next. Cinematic Alpha Wolf Fantasy, Emotional Luna Story, Dark Supernatural Destiny Fire. Step into a breathtaking paranormal Alpha Wolf universe where destiny whispers through the trees, ancient prophecies awaken, and the Luna discovers the truth hidden within her own bloodline. This supernatural werewolf story blends dark fantasy mystery, emotional bonds, and high-stakes pack secrets as shadows shift, dreams speak, and a legendary red-eyed rogue wolf, Kale, returns to shape fate. Follow a powerful first-person journey filled with Alpha King tension, Luna destiny, mysterious wolves, forbidden truths, and a prophecy that changes everything. If you love Alpha Wolf stories, supernatural drama, pack destiny lore, mysterious forest legends, and cinematic storytelling, this series will pull you in and never let go.